Welcome to the Middleware Tech YouTube channel. In this series, you'll learn about Spring MVC. All code examples used in the videos will be available on GitHub. Let's get started.
Okay. Now, if I want to say some points about Spring MVC, as the term is given, so it is a model view and controller solution. So where actually this Spring MVC used, if you see this diagram that we talked about yesterday, yes, we have used this diagram yesterday. Control C. Yes, if you see this diagram that we talked about for a use case called registration. For an use case registration, I want to implement using MVC architecture, model view control architecture, where a model is nothing but it contains the logic. Controller is responsible to handle client request and response. And the view layer is used to interact with the client, or client will always interact with the view layer. These are the three layers in Spring MVC. Now this model layer is divided into two parts. One is service layer and the DAO layer. DAO layer contain all the methods related to database interaction. And we talked about last day when you're going to implement Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC is used in the DAO layer to connect with the database. Spring JDBC is used by the DAO layer to connect with the database. Or Spring ORM also you can implement here. Fine. What about to the service layer? Already I told you that service layer is that layer. The logic that you are going to write, they are not very specific to database interaction, but some other type of logic, like I want to implement some transaction. I want to implement some email service. I want to connect with some JMS, or I want to expose my services as a web service to the external applications. I want to implement some logger or some authentication authorization. All these tasks that is not very specific to database interaction, we implement in the service layer. And here we need another one module. The name of the module already you know, that is Spring AOP. Aspect oriented programming, or Spring AOP. So Spring AOP is used in this layer. I will talk about today, but not now, and the second after break. So this Spring AOP is used in the service layer. We'll talk about how Spring AOP is used in the service layer and some related details, with very good concept how they have implemented Spring AOP. Now, when I'm talking about view and controller layer, when the request will come from this JSC page to this controller, and controller interact with the model. The Spring MVC is here. Spring MVC. Spring MVC is here. Spring MVC is here. This Spring MVC follow model view control architecture, and it is mainly going to focus on this view and controller layer, right? And using a Spring MVC you can connect to the model layer also. So here is the Spring MVC. Now we have to explore how this Spring MVC work and some of the basic introduction first. So let me talk about some basic introduction about Spring MVC first. Then we'll see step by step how it work. So as you know the term Spring MVC model view controller. Now In Spring framework, controller layer, model layer, all are POJO classes. Already I told. In Spring MVC or Spring framework, model, controller are all POJO classes. Are all POJO classes. Plain old Java object or bean class. POJO class. Fine. Okay. Now, if you see that diagram, another diagram we have given, this diagram we have given, right? This diagram. Whatever the service you are going to use in Spring framework, whatever the service, what are the modules you are going to use in Spring framework, all the modules is working above core container. So our Spring MVC you are talking about, so Spring MVC is also working above core container or IOC container that we are talking about here. So when talking about Spring MVC work above IOC container, right? Spring MVC execute above IOC container. Fine, we got second point, third point. If I want to say, then I'll say that this, I'm just saying some basic point, then I'm coming in detail. When I'm interacting with an web application, okay, I want that application should be available in different language. Okay, so that that language specific person can access the application in that specific language. As you can customize your Facebook applications or some web applications based on your specific language. So I want, what is the concept? The concept, if I want to make, or if I want to make your application should be available, as for example, most of the online examination, you will find that the corresponding website should come in that particular language, regional language. How it happened? Same project, same application, but it will come into different language to different user. How it happened? That concept is called I-18N. You have to remember this, I-18N. It's a very important technical term called I-18N support. S-U-P-P-O-R-T. What does it mean by I-18N support? I-18N support means our application would be available into multiple language. How to implement that one? Yes, we have process. We have to use separate file for separate language. So that concept is called I-18N support or I-18N internationalization. In I-18N internationalization. So, right? So make available our web application in different language. That concept is called I-18N support. Right? So in if I'm going to interact with an application using Spring MVC, it has a validation support for your input parameter. As for example, if you are doing a registration, we can implement validation. We can implement exception handling. We can implement, we have the concept of interceptor. That is nothing but database trigger like situation. It will intercept all the request and response which client is going to interacting with. So we have, in case of Spring MVC application, we have the support of interceptor. It can intercept all the request and response. It has a support for validation. You can validate all the user input. It has a support for exception handling. Exception handling. These are some of the features we're talking about. Spring MVC support. These are some of the features for your web application. Now, let me come into some more depth. See, this Spring MVC that we are talking about, this MVC framework, Spring MVC framework is based on some design pattern. Okay, if you know, there is a concept called design pattern, J2E design pattern. You may have heard the name called J2E design pattern. This Spring MVC follow some J2EE design pattern. Now, what does it mean by J2E design pattern? If you worked on Code Java is also have some design pattern. Since you're talking about J2E design pattern, let me spend some time into J2E design pattern because our Spring framework is following J2E design pattern. Now see, this layer is called presentation layer or view layer, right? This layer, right? This layer is called business layer or service layer. This layer is called DAO layer. Sometimes we use a term called integration layer. Okay. Sometimes we say it's an integration tier. We say service layer or business layer. This one we say as a presentation layer. Because Spring MVC have a solution for all presentation tier, service tier or business tier, and the integration tier. Complete solution we have with the Spring framework. So when talking about a Spring MVC, this is Spring MVC follows some J2E design pattern. In the presentation layer, so number one in the presentation layer, presentation tier. Next we have, I'm talking about business tier, business tier. Next I'm talking about integration tier, integration tier. Okay, so in this three tier, Spring MVC follows some design pattern. So what does it mean by these design patterns? Presentation tier is this tier, business tier is this tier, integration tier is this tier. So what does it mean by what are the different design pattern followed in the presentation tier? What are the different design pattern is there in business tier? What are the different design pattern is there in the integration tier? Like, so we should have some idea about them. As for example, in presentation tier, we have lots of design patterns like a front controller design pattern, intercepting filter design pattern, context object design pattern, dispatcher view design pattern. So we are talking about only one design pattern that we follow in Spring framework. Its name is front controller design pattern. Front controller. Okay, in the presentation tier. In the business tier also we have lots of design pattern. If you have worked on web application framework, you'll find lots of design pattern is there inside the business tier. We're talking about the design pattern called business delegate design pattern, service locator design pattern, session facade. In EJB we have session facade design pattern, transfer object design pattern. So multiple design pattern is there in business tier. Here in our discussion, we'll talk about only one design pattern that is connected with our Spring MVC. Its name is business delegate design pattern. Business delegate design pattern. Check the spelling if I'm wrong. I think delegate. Yeah. In integration tier, that is this tier also we have a multiple design pattern. In our multiple design pattern, like we have web service broker design pattern, or we have data access object design pattern. So in our example, we try to focus data access object design pattern. So to understand Spring MVC, very well, we should be familiar with these three basic design pattern. We have lots of other design pattern also that is supported by Spring MVC, but to understand the Spring MVC in details, we should be very much understanding about, these three design pattern. Right? So let's explore first. Before coming to Spring MVC, let's explore this three design pattern. What does it mean by front controller design pattern? Why I'll use? What are the features? What does it mean by business delegate design pattern? What does it mean by data access object design pattern? Let's explore into this, because our Spring framework Spring MVC follow these design patterns. Let's explore. First, I'll talk about front controller design pattern. What does it mean by this? See, this diagram will help you to understand front controller design pattern. Just see this slide only. Yes, this is our front controller design pattern. If you see this design pattern, you get a good idea about how this front controller design pattern works. Just see this. I don't want this. I just want to see this design pattern. I have not implemented in a slide. Let's see this. Yeah. This is a front controller design pattern. What you find here, client is sending a request. We have a controller. Its name is front controller. The request will come to this front controller. Then the request will be forwarded to a specific application controller. What does it mean is that, assume we have multiple use case. If I have a registration use case, then I have to write registration controller as an application controller. If I have a use case called search, so search control will be an application controller. If I have a use case called edit EMP, then edit EMP is an application controller, right? If I have a use case called edit product should be an application controller, or account update is an application controller. So this application controller is created based on your use case. If you have 100 use case, so 100 application controller will be there in the project. So what is this front controller design pattern is saying? Front controller design pattern is saying that when any request will come, that request will be handled by a centralized request handling mechanism. The request is so in case of front controller design pattern, we'll follow one centralized request handling mechanism. Means all the requests will come to him only. all the requests will come to the single. This front controller is not an user defined controller. It is one type of predefined controller. As for example, this front controller design pattern is followed by not only our Spring, but also it's supported by Struts framework. It is supported by JSF framework. It is supported by ADF framework. Same front controller design pattern. So front controller design pattern is saying that when a particular request will come, that request will come to a single inbuilt servlet. In case of ADF, name of the servlet is ADF controller. In case of JSF, name of the front controller is faces servlet. In case of Spring, name of the front controller is dispatcher servlet. In case of Struts 1.1, name of the front controller is action servlet. So the thing is that all this framework support front controller design pattern. When the request will come, that will be handled by a single controller. In case of the Spring MVC, name of the controller is dispatcher servlet. Remember the name. It's a name of the. It is a dispatcher servlet controller provided by Mr. Ronald Johnson itself in the year 2003. So this, because it is following a front controller design pattern, and the front controller design front controller name for the Spring MVC is dispatcher servlet. Fine. So when the request is coming to him, the request will be forwarded to a specific use case controller. Application controller is very specific. You can say use case controller. If you have an account view use case, then you have an account view controller. If you have an EMP view use case, so that will be EMP view controller, like that. Now the question is that what is the advantage of implementing a front controller? Why? They can send the request directly to him. What is the advantage? Advantage is there because, you know, as the application grows, number of servers will also increase to handle client request. As for example, you have a 300 to 400 use case. So for 300 to 400 use case, you'll get 300 to 400 controller. It is not a good approach to handle client request by 300 to 400 controller based on 300 to 400 use case. So in case of front controller design pattern, all the requests should go through a single inbuilt servlet. What is the advantage? Advantage is that you can implement authentication, you can implement authorization for the request using this front controller. This front controller will do automatically authentication, authorization, logging, and then pass that particular request to corresponding handler user. Right? So what is the advantage of using front controller design pattern? We can see whatever the request will come as well as whatever the response will go. For each request and response, we can validate, we can do authentication, authorization for each request and response under front controller design pattern. Right? Fine. Next one. Next one is business delegate design pattern. Business delegate design pattern is used into the business tier. So what is this business delegate design pattern is saying? Just see, you'll get an idea if you see the diagram. This is a business delegate design pattern diagram. So what this business delegate design pattern, if you see here, when a particular, this is in the service layer or business layer. So when the request will come from the client want to access a specific service. Means from the controller, here provides send the request to a particular service. So how the request will forward it to a particular service? How when the request will come from the client, from the controller, the request will forward it to a specific service. So how the request will be forwarded to a specific service? So related to that, this business delegate design pattern came. So this business delegate design pattern is saying is that you have to search or have to look up a particular service. Either it may be an EJB service or GMS service. You have to do some lookup in a pool of instance, or you have to send a particular request. Please share an object to connect with that particular specific business service. In case of enterprise level application, so it is going to return that specific object. Then you can, using that object, you are going to connect with a specific service. Because in case of enterprise level application, a huge amount of user is going to interact with sending huge amount of request. So in that case, this business delegate design pattern is much more specific, that is used to decouple presentation and business tier. It will provide access to business services method, and the advantage of using this business delegate design pattern is that it will hide implementation details of these business services based on the lookup type. It is going to return that specific business service that you want to connect with, right? So this implementation generally will follow how controller will get controller will get a particular business service, right? So another one design pattern is there that we generally use in the integration tier here. That is called DAO, or data access object. We talked about last day about this DAO layer, and you have implemented a good lab. So if you see this DAO layer, the data access object layer, how it look like, you can see this how it look like. So as I told you that DAO layer main purpose is to interact with the database. Database connection related methods is there. Using this database connection related method, it's going to connect with the database, right? So DAO layer is responsible. DAO layer is responsible to connect with a specific object that is very specific to database interaction. Either you can do create, update, or delete. Mainly database for applications, we generally go with this DAO design pattern or data access object design pattern. Now the question is that last day, if you remember, we have used Spring JDBC to connect with database, and that is using DAO only, data access object, right? So what is the advantage of using this DAO then? We have used Spring JDBC, DAO. What is the advantage? The advantage is that, in the case of DAO design pattern, it is used to separate low-level data access APIs from the high-level business services. Using this DAO implementation, you can implement some concept of persistence. Though you have not done last day, because if you want to implement the concept of persistence, you have to use ORM Hibernate. Sometimes if I want to decouple persistent storage from my applications, then DAO layer is the best layer to use, right? So these are the three design patterns that we're talking about, generally used for Spring enterprise level application, right? So let's come to this. When you're talking about Spring MVC, your Spring MVC, you're going to get a full-fledged application, right? That Spring MVC full-fledged application can use these layers in presentation tier, business tier, or integration tier. Correct. Okay. Now let's see how the request flow work in an enterprise level application using Spring MVC. So if you see this slide, it will give you some good idea. Where is that? Yes, just see this slide. it will give you very good overall idea about how an Spring MVC application work. Or we have given here a life cycle of request in Spring MVC. So just now told you that Spring MVC frame is used to implement your enterprise level application based on MVC design pattern, and it follow one architecture called front controller design pattern into the presentation layer. It follow front controller design pattern into the presentation layer. So when any particular request, this front controller generally implement as a dispatcher servlet. Okay, this front controller we generally implement as a dispatcher servlet in Spring MVC, right? So when a particular request, if you see the request come to assume you are sending a request for login request or registration. So what about the request? That request will come to your Spring MVC. The request first come to the dispatcher servlet. That is the front controller for Spring MVC. Now what dispatcher servlet will do, it will forward the request to a supporting controller. It will check what type of request it is. If it is for login, it will forward the request to login controller. Request for search, forward the request for search controller. The request for view account details, it will come view account controller. So what type of request it is, based on that is going to forward the request to a specific controller using an handler mapping. And when the request is forwarded to a specific controller, it is going to delegate the request to the specific controller. Now what this controller will do, this controller will apply some specific logic, as for example registration controller. It will apply some specific logic to process the request, will result in some information. So whatever it is, if you are going to do registration controller is going to interact with the registration service. Registration service is going to interact with the registration DAO, and registration DAO is going to interact with the database, and it's going to send a particular response that yes, your registration is successful. Now how this registration controller is going to send a response, you have to remember how a particular handler controller, sometimes we use a term called handler controller. So how this handler controller is going to handle the corresponding request, or how this handler controller is going to handle the corresponding response. What it will do, it will return a model and view object to the front controller. Assume if you have done registration, your data is inserted successfully, then it will send a model and view object to the front controller, because you have to send a response to the client, right? That yes, your input details are inserted successfully. So you are going to send a particular response to the client. So what type of response it is? JSP response, HTML response, or some other response? What video response, audio response, what type of response your supported controller is going to send to the front controller? Whatever the response it is, always the supporting controller is going to send a response to the front controller using an object of model and view object. Remember the name, model and view object. Now when this front controller dispatcher servlet will get the model and view object, then this dispatcher servlet will then consult the logical view name for a particular response that is coming from the supported controller. Now then what dispatcher will do is that dispatcher will interact with a particular separate component called view resolver and send the corresponding response to the client. So if the response is coming from the controller as an JSP page, then front controller will check what type of response it is. It's a response that should go as a JSP page to the client. Then this dispatcher servlet will call view resolver to identify what type of response it is. View resolver will identify that it's a one type of JSP response. Then front controller will send that particular JSP response to the client. That means when a request is submitted to the server, dispatcher service looks for an handler mapping and forward the request to a particular controller. And what supported controller has done all the tasks, he is going to send a particular response. That response is coming as a column view object. So here, how front controller is going to forward the request to a supported controller? In between, there is a concept called handler mapping. Okay, this front controller will use handler mapping to identify where the forward request should be forwarded. This front controller is some handler mapping to identify what type of response came from a supported controller. Whatever it is, to understand what type of response it is, this front controller will call another one component called view resolver. View resolver will say that it is a JSP page. Then front controller will send the JSP response to the client. If view resolver is saying no, it's an HTML page, then front controller will send the HTML page to the client. Now, if front controller says it's an audio, the front controller will send the particular audio to the client. Like this way, this complete life cycle of the request in Spring MVC work. Complete life cycle of the request. Now the question is that when the request will go from front controller to a supported controller, automatically one handler mapping will work here. Automatically or implicitly, handler mapping will work by default. So name of that default handler mapping name is bin name URL handler mapping. Bin name URL handler mapping will automatically map or forward the request from front controller to the supported controller, as well as it will automatically get the response from this controller to the front controller. Its name is bin name URL handler mapping. It will automatically work. No, I want to define my own handler mapping. That is also possible. You can define your own handler mapping also. Right now, right? So this is how the complete flow work in your Spring MVC. Right? Okay, just give me 1 minute. So in this curriculum, we find some of the terms, new terms you'll find. So let me just talk about these terms. Let me just talk about one term we find. One thing that we find here, that is called dispatcher servlet. You find some of the terms. One thing we find dispatcher servlet. Okay, so one thing you find here, its name is dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet. So what is this dispatcher servlet? It is nothing but this front controller only. So what is this dispatcher servlet? You can write here. It's a Spring front controller implementation. Spring front controller implementation. Fine. Another one technical term we find in this discussion, its name is this controller, or sometimes we say it is an user controller or user defined controller. It is not an user defined controller, it is an inbuilt controller. So you can say user defined controller. User defined controller. So user defined controller as in account controller. Generally controller name will come based on the name of the use case. The use case name is registration, then user controller, this controller name will be registration controller. Or if it's a search, then it will be search controller. So it depends on what is the use case you are going to create in your application. Based on that, the name of the user defined controller come into picture. Right? Now what is this controller will do, or user defined controller will do? It will encapsulate navigational logic, and it will delegate the corresponding request when specific business objects, right? So now when this control get a particular response, then it will send the corresponding response to the front controller using model and view object, right? So if I want to say any point about user defined controller, I want to say that it is user created component for handling request. It is user created component. It is user created component to handle the request. Fine. It's an user created component to handle the request, that we can say. Fine. Now what it will do is that it will delegate the request to business layer or service layer, right? So you can say another one point, it will delegate the request get it will delegate the request to service layer. Okay. Next, what it will do is a defined controller. When we're going to get the response, so this user defined controller, it will return model and view object to the front controller, return model and view object to front controller. That's it. This is a task of user defined controller. Fine. So if I want to say anything about view, then what I'll say? View means with which customer is going to interacting with. Now what I'm saying is that this front controller will interact with this front controller will send the request to view resolver. Front controller got the response. Now front controller have to understand, right, what type of response it is. JSP response, HTML response, audio response, video response, what type of response it is. So that then front controller will call another one component. Name of the component is view resolver. So what this view resolver will do, view resolver used to map, the view resolver is used to map logical view names to an actual view implementation. If it's connected with HTML, it will send the HTML. If it's connected with JSP, it's going to send to the JSP. The purpose of this view resolver is it is used to map logical view name to actual view implementation. Is used to map logical view name used to map logical view name to actual view implementation. Fine. Okay. Now when sending this logical view resolver, now front controller is sending the request to the view resolver. How? Front controller is sending the request to a controller. How? It is actually using one of the component called handler mapping. Handler mapping. So what is this handler mapping? This handler mapping is used. This handler mapping is used for mapping incoming request to an individual controller. It is used to map incoming request to an individual controller, right? So it is used to map incoming request to individual controller, right? Now I'm told you that this individual controller is going to send a particular response or model and view object to whom? The front controller, right? This user defined controller is going to send a model and view object to the front controller, right? So these are some of the technical terms. If you want to follow the steps, how it works, just now I told you that how this model and view and controller is going to work. Now I want to show another one slide. You'll get some more idea from here. The name of the slide is this. So if you see this slide, you'll get a good understanding. Just now I told you any particular request is coming. When any particular request will come, either it is a GET request or it's a POST request. The request will directly come to the dispatcher servlet, right? This request will come to the dispatcher servlet as you find it here. Now dispatcher servlet is going to forward the request to a specific user-defined controller. And that is your defined controller is going to return model and view object to dispatcher servlet. Now what dispatcher servlet will do, it is going to check what type of response it is. The dispatcher servlet will send that request to a component called view resolver to identify what type of view it is. View resolver send a response to the dispatcher. This view is one type JSP. Then it's going to send the JSP response to that user. Right. So this is how the flow work in Spring MVC. Complete flow you'll find. This is how the complete flow you'll find in Spring MVC. Right, but we can only understand this complete Spring MVC implementation only when we'll create an application. Right, so let's create an application using Spring MVC. Let's create a simple application itself for Spring MVC. Okay, just write here the lab that we're going to do, Spring MVC login application. This we want to do. So login application means what? Means I have a login page. Means I have a login page. It is like this. I have a login page. JSP. So when I'm going to insert my user ID and password inside the login page. So once the login is done, then it will forward the request either to one page called success.jsp, or it is going to forward the request to another one page that is called failure.jsp. Failure.jsp. It will forward the request to either success.jsp or failure.jsp. So this type of login application that you want to implement using Spring MVC. So that means when I'm going to send a request, for the request will come to the dispatcher, it will come to a particular servlet, right? Controller. So assume the controller name is login controller. Login controller dot Java. Now what login controller will do? Login controller is going to cross check whether login controller interact with the service layer interact with the DAO layer, and check whether the users are correct or wrong. If users are correct, it will forward the request to success.jsp. If this is wrong, then it will forward the request to failure.jsp. It should be like this. Right, so this type of simple applications we want to implement using Spring MVC. Now if you see this time, this application is a web application. It's a web application, full-fledged application. We have view, controller layer, DAO layer, service layer. So it's a full-fledged application itself that you're going to implement now. So to do this, what you have to do, let's write the step first. Step one, you have to create a dynamic web project. Now it will not work a code Java project using this. You have to create a dynamic web project for this requirement. So you can create dynamic web project. Step number two, what you have to do, as you know, you have to add all the jars in the project. So then step 3, what we will do, you have to create this view page, login.jsp. Right, you have to create a controller, login controller.java. These things you have to do, right? Now, as you know that when any particular request will come to a web application, request will always forward it to a particular web XML file to find out where the request will go. In the web.xml file, it is already written, right? Right. So we have to write web.xml file. Correct. Right. So this is how we have to move step by step. So let's do it one by one. It will take time. Let me see how it will work. We have to write dispatches servlet.xml also. Right. Okay, so let me check. It is about. Okay. Let's do it one by one. Last time we have created a Java project. That's why we have used this IDE, right? And now I have to create a J2E project. J2E project will not work because it's a Java IDE. So for J2E project, we have to click on this. This is the process. Right? So let me create a project. Actually, last time I'm just checking it is working or not set up. That's why I have created this one. Close the project. So let's create a file, new, and dynamic web project. See here, we're going to create dynamic web project this time. Select a particular project name as login Spring MVC project, right? So login application using Spring MVC. That's it, login application, that's it. By creating this login application, I'm using the Tomcat server as 7.0. This is the web module we have used. Fine, move next. Next. I want to generate web.xml file, not required, finish. Okay, if you're not generating, then from where I'll get. This is the project you will get. So you should have a web.xml file. So how I can get this? Do one thing, create another one project. I need that web.xml file, right? Generate this one. Finish. So this will be example file. This time it is created here. Copy this one. Copy and paste it in our web. That's it. So we got the structure, right? So delete this one. Fine. Okay. Now when you create this dynamic web project, you will find lots of component here. So as you know that this is a basic structure for an Eclipse project, web application. We have under web.inf, we have web.xml file, lib for library, and Java classes should come on a resource folder. This is the structure of the project for a web application that it will come. Now, we have to do these things one by one. So second point, what you have to do, I have to add all the jars. I'm not going to connect all the jars. So just copy the jars, same jars that we talked about last day. Just you have to add all the jars in your project. Just add all the jars. Slide slow. Now in this example, I'm just copied it here. Now there is a so I've added all the jars. Fine. Now there is a dependency on JDK and Tomcat. Okay. What dependency? Just let me just tell you. Now you added the jars, fine. Dependency is there. Assume you are using Spring MVC project, right? So you are using Java 7. So for Java 7, you can use Tomcat. Tomcat is server, right? Since you're doing web application, we need a particular web server. So you can use Tomcat 7, and that is using Spring version 4.x. See, there is a version specific setup. If it does not match, it will not work. If you are using Java 8, then you have to use Tomcat 8, and you can use Spring 5.x. So Spring 5.x is very specific to Java 8. Even it will run 9 also. So assume you have Java 8, it will work with Tomcat 8.5 also, and that support Spring 5.x. So this is the, you have to think about which version of Spring you are using. Based on that, the specific jar you have to collect. So if you are using Spring 5, then you have to use Tomcat 8 or 8.5 with JDK 8. Right? Okay. So that is the point. Next thing. Next I want to say here is this is our project. Now what do you do? I should have the Tomcat 7. Assume I'm following the first one. You're following first one, that means you have to install step 3. Step 3, install Java 7 and Tomcat 7, that you have to do. It should be there in your system, else it will not work. Or if you are using this setup, it depends on you how we are going to move our existing project. You need to install Java 8 and Tomcat 5. Since this type of example already you have done in Spring IOC, that's why I have selected this one. So for this one, what I have to do? I have to install Java 7, JDK, Tomcat. I have to use Tomcat 7, and Spring 4.x. We have to Spring 4.x. We have to install. So from where I'll get all these three. First, download JDK, Java 7. Just go into the right download Java 7. Assume download. So till Java 10, JDKs are free. Okay, as per Oracle recommendation, these are freely downloadable. You can use it for your application. But from Java 11, things are not free. From Java 11, Oracle introduced two types of JDK. One is for free version, another is for commercial version. From Java, okay, the free version of Java is called OpenJDK, and commercial versions you have to pay for to the vendor. So these things actually came, commercial use of Java and non-commercial use of Java. This concept Oracle implemented from Java 11. Okay, from Java 11, if you are going to use some JDK and you are using for commercial purpose, then you have to pay to the vendor. They can cross-check the details on the back end. Fine, that you have to remember. Now I'm talking about Java 7 or Java 8. These are freely available. You can use it. Now we're talking about to install Java 7. Assume, since I'm just saying that I want to do this this one for Spring MVC. So I need JDK 7. Install JDK 7. Then just check where is JDK 7. Download JDK 7. So you have to go to the Oracle site, and here you have to download JDK 7. So this is your Java 7 download link for your, if you are Windows 64-bit, then you have to download this one. So this is a link for your Java download. You can download that and you can install in your system as they've given. Control. Next, I need another one component. You have to download this one. If I'm using Windows, then you have to download this one, right? Yes, you have to select this and then you have to download. Already I have in the system and installed also. They'll tell you to sign up for Oracle and you can sign up and download it based on your need. Fine. Next one. I have to download Tomcat 7 since I'm following this one. So I have to download Tomcat 7. So go to Tom. So download Tomcat. You can come into this and see here which version of Tomcat you want. You can just select that version and download this Tomcat based on your need. For me, it will come to Windows 64-bit. This one. Just select and download Tomcat. Control C. You can download Tomcat and extract the zip and put it inside the C drive. So where I'll put the link, this is for Tomcat. Next, what I have to do, I have to download Spring 4.x. This example I'm using Spring other versions. So download Spring 4.x. So to download Spring 4.x release, you can come into this path and you can download based on our system mesh type. Control V, enter. Fine. So these are some of the jars you have to download that is required in our application. So next, what I have to do? Next, I have to install Tomcat. Fine. Now, what I have to do is that I have to integrate this IDE with the Tomcat server. Right? I'll come into that, but before that, let me focus on the lab side. Lab side in the sense, this is the lab that we are going to do. This is our application that we're going to do. That means first I have to create a login page, success page, and failure page. Correct? The view layer. So login page .jsp, success.jsp, and failure.jsp. These are the 3 pages you have to create. Fine. So this 3 page, how we can create? Go to this and create under web INF. See, this Spring MVC application can be done in different approaches there. Okay, different people follow different approach to create an Spring MVC application because it's a full-fledged application for your web project. Right? So different people follow different approach, how they want to put all the folder structure, coding structure. It may vary from project to project, but the actual structure is same. But in our examples also, I'll follow slight approach, is different approach. Like I want to put all the JSP pages inside a folder. Name of the folder is JSP. So I'm creating a folder JSP, and inside this JSP folder, I want to get all these 3 pages. Right click, new JSP. First page is, assume I want to use index.jsp. First page. Second page, you want to login.jsp. So we can just write here login.jsp. Okay. Third page, I want to create success.jsp, failure.jsp. And next, I want to create failure.jsp. Right? So total 4 JSP pages we have created. Now you'll see that why I have created index.jsp. So what I want is that I want index.jsp should be the home page of the project. Okay. Index.jsp. So when I'm running the home page, I'll get the link. If I click that link, I'll come to the login.jsp page where I have to do the login, and based on my login, I'll get either success.jsp page or failure.jsp page. This is how you want to implement view layer. Correct. So So create an index.jsp page first. Index.jsp, what you're going to write? Let's see, this is my index.jsp. In the index.jsp or home.jsp, you can think it as a home.jsp page also. Just right here, welcome to Spring MVC or something like that. Right. Now what I want is that this is a home page. So in the home page, it will give a link. If I click that link, then I'll get login.jsp page. So this home page have header, footer, side panel. I'm not going into all those things implementation. If you want, you can implement using. You can use Bootstrap to implement all those things. But I want to just provide a particular link here. Fine. So just how to get a link. A ref equal to some value like www.net something, some value, and assume this is a login plus a, sorry, it should be a. This is how you can provide a particular link. So when I click on the link, then I'll go to that particular page where login is defined. So how I can get that? Since I cannot go to thatos.net, it's a website, right? I want Spring to automatically get the URL for the login page. So how to get automatically URL for a login page? We can use dollar page context dot request dot context path. So if I'm going to use this page context dot request dot context path, dynamically it will give the complete URL to us. Okay, and you can use some unique name as login, like this. So what the purpose of this writing this is that it will dynamically provide the complete link to go to the login page. Remember that. As I told you that it is not mandatory to do it. It's one approach that I'm following here for Spring MVC. Now here we have created, if you see this example, we have created the pages for this login application. So when you send a request first time, so here I have to implement the request. As you know that for a web application, when you send any request first time, the request will go to, always it will go to an web.xml file, as you know, based on the servlet implementation. So here also, if I send any request in the user interface, it will first go to web.xml file. So this is the web.xml file. Now in this, if you see this web.xml file here, I have to do some settings like this web.xml file. When I'm going to run it first time, this project, I want that complete. When I run this project first time, I should get the home page. So how I can get the home page when I'm going to run it? Here I have to use one of the element called welcome file list. This will send the request to the home page. Which is the home page? Home page is index.jsp, right? So how to go to the home page? Index.jsp web inf / JSP. JSP is small, right? JSP / index.jsp. So we will come to the home page using this link and save it. / webinf / JSP / index.jsp. Fine. Now you'll find some error. This type of error come into picture when everything is fine. Just let me see. It's correct only. Now let me check. It is saying that welcome functions cannot be character change. Welcome file list. Okay. We have missed one of the element. It will not support here. Welcome file nest does not support directly the link. Here we have to provide welcome file, and this welcome file should have this path. So if you see here, when I'm going to run this project first time, I need the home page. How I can get the home page? That page I have mentioned inside this welcome file list. Fine, that's why it is next. So as you know, in the web.xml file, we have the servlet and servlet mapping element. So how to write servlet element? Servlet and servlet mapping. Servlet mapping. Fine. So inside the servlet, we have to provide the actual servlet name. So actual servlet name, there is some element called servlet name. The assume servlet name is Spring Dispatcher. Spring Dispatcher, and the corresponding servlet class. Servlet class is nothing but the path of the dispatcher servlet. So why is the dispatcher servlet is defined? Just open a Spring API documentation. Just write Spring API documentation. Again, I want to see where is the dispatcher servlet exist. So dispatcher servlet path is available inside WordG Spring Framework. WordG Spring Framework web. See WordG Spring Framework web, right? Then you'll find somewhere servlet. Servlet. So this is the path where your dispatcher servlet exists. Just open this. You can see the corresponding class dispatcher servlet. This is the inbuilt servlet provided. Right, so this is responsible to handle client request and response. Inbuilt servlet based on the font controller design pattern. So this servlet path you have to provide here, because this is the servlet where the request will come first. Right, now this is your servlet element is done. Okay, now servlet mapping. Under servlet mapping, you have servlet name and URL pattern. servlet name and URL pattern. Now this servlet name and this servlet name should be same. Control C, Control V. This servlet name should be same. And I want any type of request should handle, so you can slash make it. Fine. That's it. That's it. We have made the path of our dispatcher servlet. Okay. Dispatcher servlet path is ready. Now what I want is that here dispatcher servlet path is ready. So when you are going to send a request first time, where the request will go? First the request will go to the web.xml file. First this request will go to web.xml file. Web.xml file. So what is there inside the web.xml file? This web.xml file contains the path of the dispatcher servlet. Right? Now from this web.xml file, the request will be forwarded to a controller servlet. So, dispatcher servlet will forward the request to a controller servlet. Correct? So how the request will forward to a controller servlet, or how dispatcher servlet is going to forward the request to a controller servlet? For that we have another one supporting controller file. Its name is Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. We need another one file. Its name is Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. This is the file is required. This file actually work with your dispatcher servlet, or sometimes we say it is a supporting controller file. Now this file actually contain all the connectivity between your view resolver as well as all the controller, service layer, and DAO layer connectivity. Everything is defined inside this Spring dispatcher servlet.xml file. So this file we generally create inside a separate folder here. Under web.inf, create a particular folder called config. So inside this config folder, I want to have this file. Right click new file, Control V, Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. Dispatcher is required. Now what is the content of this file? I'm coming into that. This dispatcher servlet is actually used by our dispatcher servlet to forward the request to the next level. Right now, dispatcher servlet, Spring dispatcher servlet, if you see, this is your spec. What the code is there inside this? So already I told you that it is same like equivalent to the Spring.xml in IOC. Okay, so here we have beans, root element, and you are starting a beans element. You should close it. Right now, in this file, what you want is that I want to forward the request that is coming. I log in, the request is coming to index.jsp, right? Not login.jsp. The request is coming to index.jsp or home.jsp. So when the request is coming to home.index.jsp, this is the page. I click login, right? Then that request first go to web.xml file. Web.xml file, we have this servlet, dispatcher servlet, and dispatcher servlet will forward the request it will go to the dispatcher servlet. So when the request will go to the dispatcher servlet, it will load one file. It is called Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. So how it is going to load another one file? Here inside the servlet, we can use one element. Its name is init param. Already you know that this init param element is used to load some file for a single servlet. So you can use param name. It has some inbuilt property and the param value. Fine. So under param name means it has, remember, you have to remember this property. The property name is context config location. Context config location. This attribute is required, context config location, and it is going to load which file? This file, Spring dispatcher server.xml. So how to load it? Just check the path web inf, then config. Inside the config, you have a structure Spring dispatcher server.xml. This name. Right click, refactor rename. We need this name. Control C. Right. Yeah. Now you can just put Control V. That's it. So when the request will come to this dispatcher servlet will load this XML file, Spring dispatcher server.xml. Right. Now when dispatcher servlet will load this XML file, why it is going to load this XML file? I'm going to forward the request to a supporting controller, because this file actually contain the path of the controller. This file actually contain the path of the controller. Now you'll say that how I'll get the path of the controller from this file. Correct. Now here I want to say Spring dispatcher server.xml. Here, remember we talked about this Spring MVC application. I want this is controller, right? And this controller is going to interact with whom? Service. I'll come into that later. Now this login controller. This login controller is a simple Java class. So just create one login controller. You can create login controller here. Right click, new class. Assume the package name is com dot controller, and my controller name is login controller. So this login controller can create a simple Java class. I'm coming into this how login controller work. So how the request is forwarding to this controller using this Spring dispatcher server.xml. So in Spring dispatcher server.xml, we'll use one of the attribute. If you remember, and here actually the request will be forwarded with the help of @controller annotation. In this login controller, we have one annotation, it's called @controller annotation. @controller. So using this @controller annotation, it will automatically. Now already I told you what type of annotation it is. We have used in Spring IUC @AutoWord, right? Using that, you are going to inject some object and set another object. Same like that in Spring MVC, we have @controller annotation. It is going to inject the instance of controller inside the container. Now so that the request will be automatically forwarded to this controller, right? Fine. Now what I'm going to write here, now if a particular annotation is defined in Spring IOC, by default Spring IOC container cannot understand an annotation. You have to enable it. How to enable it? You have to provide that particular class instance so that it will identify the annotation in case of Spring IOC. But what happened is in MVC, in case of Spring MVC, we use one of the element. The name of the element is component scan. Remember, name of the element is component scan. Using component scan. So how to call the component scan? We can call it using context component scan. Using that component scan, you are going to make it enable the annotations in Spring MVC. As for example, what you are going to do in Spring IOC, you're going to provide an object of AutoWare annotation bin post processor. Then only at that AutoWare annotation is enabled. You are going to provide an object of request processor, bin post processor, right? So then only that at that request annotation is enabled. Same like that in Spring MVC, you have to use this component scan, context component scan, base package equal to, what is the class name? com.controller. This is the package name, com.controller. So when you're using this, then only @controller annotations can identify the corresponding package. So you have to use this, then only @controller annotations can identify this package. Right? Fine. So the request will be forwarded to whom? To this controller. Again, I'm saying, first the request will come index.jsp page. I click the link. When I click the link, then the request will come to web.xml. So when the request will come to web.xml file, from web.xml file, request will go to dispatcher servlet. From dispatcher servlet is going to load. That time the request will go to this Spring dispatcher.xml file. The Spring dispatcher.xml file is going to load. It's going to fire this component scan. So the request will forwarded to the controller. So in the com.controller package, we have the controller class. So request will come to this controller class. Right? Fine. What I want, if I click that link, it should forward me a particular login page. If I click the link, then I should get a login page. Not success failure. I should get a login page. So from here, the request is coming to whom? Dispatcher servlet. .java. Right. Now dispatcher servlet.java. From here, the request will go to login controller. Yes. Now this login controller, what it will do? This login controller is going to send success or failure. This login controller is going to send success or failure to the dispatcher servlet. Or what? Let me check. It is going to send some name to the dispatcher servlet. How it is? Let's see here. This is login controller, right? So already I told you that is a defined controller will already return a model and view object. So you can write here public void or public, you can write model and view, model and view login page view. login page view. This is my method assume, and this method is going to forward the request. This method is going to forward the request to the login page. So how this method is going to forward the request to the login page? How the request will come to this method itself. Remember, the request will come to this method with the annotation is called @request mapping. Right? Now you can see, don't here I've used, don't use model and view from the portlets. It will not work. You have to use modular view servlets. Now it is creating model and view object. That means I have to create a model and view object. So create a model and view object, model and so if you see this, it is going to return a model and view object. Model and view obj equal to new model and view. Right? And what I want to send is that I want to send the name of the page, that is login.jsp. So you can just, name of the page is login. So then return obj. So this method is returning a model and view object. This method is returning a model and view object. Right? So this controller is returning model and view object. Right? Now here I've used request mapping. So the request will come now when in the index.page JSP page, you are sending /login or /login1, whatever the name, it's a unique name should be there. So the request will go into this name, Control C, and the login controller, it will check whether this name is there or not. So here we have provided the value as value equal to /login, method equal to, you can use the method as request method dot get, save it. So this is how it look like. So when the request will come, it will come inside this link. The name of the link we have used here, if you see, name of the link is /login1. So it will come into this /login1, and it will send a response. the dispatcher servlet, right? So it will send a response to the dispatcher servlet. When the response came to the dispatcher servlet, now dispatcher servlet, what it will do? It will check what is this response. Dispatcher servlet, it will check what is this model and view object. Now to understand what is this model and view object, dispatcher servlet will call another one component. Its name is view resolver. It will call another one component. Its name is view resolver. So you can create an object of that, bin id equal to view resolver. Okay, and class equal to use. Now where is the view resolver? This is internal resource view resolver. If you check what is the path. Internal resource view resolver is a part of web servlet. So web servlet. So under web servlet, you will find somewhere view. Yes, it's part of this. Go inside what is Spring framework web servlet view. Here you'll find one class called internet resolve view resolver. Yes, internal resource view resolver. Just go into this class. Dispatcher servlet will send the request to this component. To identify what type of response it is. What type of response it is? The response that came from the method. It's a JSP, or it's an HTML, or it's PHP, or Go. What type of response? What type of response it is? It's an HTML or a audio response, video response, or JSP. So what type of response it is, or PDF? It will forward a request to that particular response. So how it is going to forward? Here we have to use some. So see, when you find any particular page, dispatcher servlet will forward the request to whom? Dispatcher servlet will forward the request to view resolver. Now view resolver will check what type of response it is. So how view resolver is going to check? When it find then that response, it will send the client. So view resolver is going to check what type of response it is. Right? Now, how view resolver will check? It is returning login. So view resolver will check this, assume login .jsp. So there is two things, the name and the extension. Name is called prefix. How it identify whatever it is. This first name is called prefix, this one is called prefix, and this one is called suffix. What it will do is that here property name equal to prefix, and you can use prefix as value wavinf / JSP. Right? Slash. So the prefix, it will check the corresponding prefix names in the JSC folder. If the suffix is .jsp extension, name equal to suffix so if the suffix is .jsp extension so if the suffix is .jsp extension then view resolver can understand that it's a .js page and it'll forward the request to this for the request to dispatcher servlet saying that it is a JSP page. So when it finds that yes, it is a JSP page, then dispatcher servlet will send that JSP login.jsp to the user. Then user will get the login.jsp page. You see the flow, the complete flow I have done now only. The first, when I'm going to run this page for a particular login link, the request will go to a web.xml file. The web.xml file, already we know that request will go to a particular servlet. So in this example, it is going to a particular controller servlet. Its name is dispatcher servlet. When the request will go to the dispatcher servlet, the dispatcher servlet will load this file because init parameter is defined. So why? Because where to forward the request? To a controller. But that controller should be path should be available inside Spring Dispatcher server.xml using component scan. Then only it can identify that yes, there is a class called login controller. Then it will find that particular unique name inside the login controller. And go to the login controller. In the login controller, it will find that unique name. Yes, it is there. Then it will call this functionality and it's returning model and view object as a login. Now this controller is returning model and view object as a login. Dispatcher server don't know what is this model and view object. Then dispatcher server will call resolver view. Please identify what type of model and view object it is. View resolver will identify yes, this is a JSP page, and it sent to the response to the dispatcher server saying that it is a JSP page. The dispatcher server will send that JSP page to the client. This is how this flow actually working, right? Fine. So do one thing. Let me check first. It is run as Java run on server. Let me check if there is any error first. So there is no error. Now see here, I got the link login first time. Click the login link. Then I should get the login page. Click the login link. I should get the login page. It is saying that in line number 1, dispatcher server.xml, Spring dispatcher server.xml, there is some problem in line number 1, beans. So let me check what is the problem with this. Okay. The problem is that we have not defined the namespace here. You have to define the namespace. So already I told you that namespace you have to define for all the beans that you are going to use here in Spring MVC. Assume you are going to use IOC container. So you have to provide the namespace for IOC. You are going to use C namespace, P namespace concept. So you have to use a namespace for C and P namespace. You are going to use transaction. Then you have to provide the namespace for transaction. You're going to use AOP. Then you have to include the namespace for AOP, right? So all the namespace you have to include one by one under beans. How I can do that? Already I told you last day how I can get the details. Now for the timing, I'm not going to waste time there. I'm just going to copy paste all the namespace details from a particular file. That is this, where I have written all the namespace details in a single location. Like this. You see here, I've just written it properly so that we don't have to hit an error later. So if you see here in this flow, these are all the beans and the namespace for context, namespace for AOP, namespace for P, namespace for transaction, namespace for util, everything is defined here, right? And here, whatever it is, you can use based on your version. For the time being, we are using 5.0, so you can use 5.0 also. But here, we have used context component scan, some spelling mistake, equal to base package com.controller, right? So from here it can identify base package com.controller. Another one property is there, analysis is there for MVC. MVC, why MVC? Because I'm going to use one of the important MVC annotation called @controller, right? Because here I'm going to use @controller MVC annotations. So how your container can identify that you're going to use @controller? So you have to provide that features using MVC annotation driven. If you write this, then you can apply all the annotations @controller, @service, @DAO, @resource. Right? But for the time being, I want to use only one annotation that is called @controller. That's it. So do one thing, select your project, right click, run as Java application. Login page. So if I click on login, yes. So when I click on login, I should get login page. The request is forwarded because we have not created the login page, right? That's why nothing is there in the login page. If you write something here, welcome to login page, then login page will come. Welcome to login page. Now see that you will get the login page. I got login page. So this first flow is completed. This flow is done. That just now I told you. This is the complete flow, right? This flow is done. I got the login page. That means dispatcher server send me the login page. Right? So in this implementation, what we have done here, we have created S4, S7. Create servlet dispatchers, XML, Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. Right? Fine. Now, when I get the login, next what I have to do, I have to create login page. It will take user ID and password, right, from the user. Next step. When I get the login page, so dispatcher server send login.jsp. Login.jsp. I got the login page. Now from the login page, I have to write user ID and password. So again, from the login page, user is going to send a request, user ID and password. So where the request will go to web.xml file. Correct? Okay. So let me do it first, create this login page first. So open your login page. Yes. Now here, what I want to do, simple plain HTML we are going to write. Using plain HTML file, we'll implement this login page. So write that one only. I'm not going to use. Take the first parameter as user ID colon password colon. So use some HTML element like input type, equal to text, name equal to, you can take as user ID. Similarly, you can use password field also, or password field you can use username. So here also you are going to write input type equal to text and name equal to pass. So after that you have to insert, you have to click a submit button to submit the details into the database. So you can write here input equal to submit value equal to submit, right? So this is a normal HTML syntax only, right? Okay. So now the thing is that if I click submit button, I want to forward the request to a controller. That means I have to implement the form element. Form name equal to of a method equal to post. Method equal to post and name equal to, or you can write action. So how are you going to define the action? That tick action we always use providing a particular link. Just give me 1 minute. Yes. So this action generally always we put as a link. So here you can define the link, like how to get the link. That link already you've done in the index page. Same like approach you can use. This approach. Control C. Control V and make it login to. So the form element I've started, and then I should close the form element after this. That's it, save it. So I don't think we should get any error. Oh no, here some warning. For method equal to post, action equal to this. Fine. Now when I click login button, I click submit, request will forward it to this link. When I click submit, it will go to web.xml file. From web.xml file, it will go to dispatcher servlet. From dispatcher servlet, it will go to login controller. Control C, it will come to login controller once again. Now in the login controller, it will search that link /login2. Search this link /login2 in the login controller. So how it will work? Just write Control C, Control V. Now here, what you're going to do is that I'm going to forward the request to this from login page to the corresponding controller implementation. Now here you can write what type of request it is. Just see here. It is a post type request. So if it is a post type request, then in your login controller, you have to make it as a post. Fine. Now this time the request should be forwarded to a particular number called login2. This is my method, and you can check the method as login, some other name called login check. Now what this login check will do, it will take that request, assume it is going to take the request as the request of HTTP servlet request. HTTP servlet request. So assume the request your login controller login check is going to take as an HTTP servlet request. Now what do you want? I want to get both the input parameter user ID and password. So how I can get both the user parameter user ID and password? I have to write a string user ID equal to request dot get parameter. And it will going to take user ID. Similarly, I'm going to insert password also. So where is the password? Password is available. Pass we have used, not password, pass. User ID I capital and pass. So user ID I capital and here I'm going to use pass and save it. So when you got user ID and password, after that, well, I'm not going to the database for the timing. Let me check here only if it is working or not. After that, what I want is that like if user ID dot equals take any particular value A, B, C fixed value. Okay, if it is then return success. Like this. Else return failure. Fine. So it is returning a particular string, right? In this example, you can just let me tell you that your model and view object parameter can be a string also. Okay, since you are returning model and view object, so do one thing. You can create a model and view object. Control C. Control V, and it is success. And return object. Similarly, if it is failure, copy this, Control C, and return failure. So this is how you can implement. Okay, now here if if you find something you need to modify, then you can modify the code also. Like if ABC it's matching, then returning object obj, else it is going to return failure. Fine. That's it. That's it, done. So what is going on? Get login controller. The login controller based on user input, you are going to send the response. So whom you are going to send the response from login controller? Login controller, you are going to send the response to dispatcher servlet. Now next, what this is doing? Dispatcher servlet is calling view resolver to identify whatever object it is. Now view resolver identified, and view resolver is saying that it is a JSP. Right? So, and this JSP or success.jsp or failure.jsp, whatever it is, view resolver is saying that it's a JSP page. To whom? To the request dispatcher. Then request dispatcher send that JSP page to the client. Correct? Let me check it is working or not. Select your project, right click, run as sub application. Find any exception. Check if is there any error or not. Right click, clear. From where you'll find that whether there is any error or not. Let me check. Run your JSP page. Right click, run as web application. So this is, so when you click login, just see here how this login page look like. Last time it was not coming like this. I've implemented the login page. That's it is coming like this. Right? Fine. Now, if I'm going to push some user ID A, B, C, and password is XYZ and click submit, in which page it is going? So what you have to do is that you have to write that success page and failure page. This is a success page. Just write here login success and use the failure page .jsp. Just control C in the failure page.jsp. Just write login failed. Save it and just cross check here. I've given the details, click submit. It is saying login failed. If I'm going to use capital MVC and click submit, it is saying login success. So if you see here, the login failed and login success is working fine. Capital ABC only login success. If you just write anything, it will show as login failed. Right? So this is the complete flow that gets executed here. This is the complete flow that gets executed step by step using an Spring MVC. Right. Now the application that we have done here, it is a completely basic one. Just to check that how the complete flow of your Spring MVC is working. Right. So now what we'll do is that we'll just upgrade this login application using some of the features. So just see here all the features that we'll do one by one. First point is that this login application is not connected with database. Okay, I want this login should be performed based on the database table. Right. Now what you can do is that this Spring MVC, it can connect with Spring ORM to connect to database, or you can integrate this Spring MVC with the Spring JDBC to connect to database. You can do that. But in this example, our main focus is on Spring MVC only, neither Spring ORM nor Spring JDBC. So what we'll do is that we'll create a normal database connection, and using that we'll try to implement the same task. So what I'll do here is that right click close all. This is the controller layer. This is a controller layer, right? So controller layer is should call service layer, and service layer should call to the DAO layer. That implementation you have to implement here. Right. So if controller layer is calling service layer, so how it is, just see here. I'm going to do some copy paste because you've written lots of things. So assume here I've already implemented this DAO layer and service layer, control C. I'm doing slight copy paste because control paste. So if you see here, this controller layer should interact with the service layer. So in the service layer, you have reg service IMPL. Lots of things they have implemented. Fine. Do one thing. Let us do it manually, because here lots of things come into picture together. So delete. So what I want next, this controller layer should interact with the service layer. This controller layer, it should interact with the service layer. That means interacting with the login service. Login service.java, and this login service.java will interact with login DAO.java, and this login DAO.java will interact with database. We want to do this implementation so that whatever the validation you are going to implement using database, that we can implement. So login service.java, so we'll create a separate package called com.service. here right click new class, assume the corresponding package name is com.service, and here I want to implement the service class as login service. Fine. Now login service should interact with login DAO layer. Get another one class login DAO. Or you can write it like right click new class, name the class package name as com.dao, and the corresponding class name is login DAO. Fine. Now what you want is that I want login DAO to interact with the database and check user ID password is correct or not. So in the database you have to create a particular table. Let me create a table called user. Okay, user table have two parameters, user ID and password. So based on these two parameters is going to validate. I'm going to do some copy paste because writing too many code is not required at all. So come to the DAO layer. So this is a connection I'm going to create. And in the DAO layer, and this is the this. So in the DAO layer, just see this. In the DAO layer, what we have done. First, we have created a connection object. So this already you know, I don't have to say anything. You have to load the driver, you have to create connection string. Then it is going to return the connection. Then the login check. If you want to implement a database, then you have to just toggle command. Now the user class you have not at all created. It is going to interact with a table called user underscore details, right? Let me check any table is there in the user underscore details or not the table. For the table name user underscore details. Let me check. Now there is no such table user underscore details, so you have to create it. ID and paste password. Take it both string type. create table name. Tell me id number 20, then pwd number, or if you are going to make both of them as a string, id and number, id then pwd, right? Okay, some small mistake. Bracket to 20. Now here again a small mistake. User underscore details, id varchar 220, enter. Next password. Varchar 220, enter. So table created, it's fine. So take minimum 2 attribute, insert into table means user underscore detail. Just give me 1 minute. Now if you see here, insert into user underscore details values. Now here I have to insert ID and password. So assume my ID parameter is, both are string type, assume both are string type. So ID is 1234 and password is welcome. First row, then I'm going to insert second row 5678 and the password is hello. So I have to create commit. Fine. Now if you see here, this table created user underscore details. So that only you are doing here. Select star from user underscore details where ID equal to this. So where user class you have not created, create a class called user. Right click new class user. And assume I'm going to create a separate package bin. and this user class contain private string uid, private string uname. So you can use getters and setters for this two instance variable. That's it. User class. So for user class, inside this login check method, what we are going to do, select star from user details or ID equal to this. So user and password, whatever you are going to insert from the user interface, it is going to check whether that user ID and password is correct or not. If that user ID and password is correct, it will return true because it will be available in the database. If user ID password is not correct, then it is going to return false. So this is my login check method. Fine. So it will take ob dot get uid, ob dot get uname. Fine. Now this login check method is returning a boolean value. Are you going to override? No, I'm not going to override anything. This is a normal method only. It is returning a boolean value, returning false. If it is there, true. That's it. So this is my login check method with database. Login DAO is completed. So who is calling login DAO? Login service. So go to the login service. Login service, create this method login check. Try to use this method signature. Login service. So what login service will do? Login service will interact with the DAO layer. Login DAO ld equal to new login DAO. It is a normal class only, right? Then I'm calling ld dot login check semicolon. That's it. So once it will check, it's going to return a boolean value. So I'm going to return a boolean value, boolean b equal to dot login check, and after that you're going to return b. That's it, done. Because this method is returning a boolean value, fine. Now who is calling this login check method, login service method? That is called by, who is calling login service method called by controller? Now what we have done last time is that it is going to cross check with ABC. Now this time it is not going to cross check with the ABC, it is going to cross check with the actual value that is coming from the database. So that means now this time login controller is going to connect with login service. How? You can write login service ls equal to new login service. Now using login service, I'm going to call ls dot login check of earlier. Now this is going to you're going to pass a user object, right? So new user, pass this two parameter, user ID, password. So in the user class, we should have a parameterized constructor. You can provide default constructor also. Right click source, add constructor using field. So constructor you provided inside the class. Now it should work. The login controller. So login check equal to new user. Done. Now it is going to return a boolean value, right? Boolean b equal to this. Now if true, then return success is return value. That's it. Failure. That's it. You have done. I think it should work. Let me check. This is a login application. Check you should not get any error, and this login application should work with database. Database field, we have two fields. One is called select star from user underscore details. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and welcome. Let me check it's working or not. Yes, it is saying login success. Let's see, let me give some other value. Submit, saying login failed. So what we find? This example is very well working with the database. In this example, is very well interacting with the database. Now logging in this example, login controller is interacting with the database. That means with the help of login service and login DAO. Correct. But the approach that we have done still now, this is not the correct approach that we used in Spring Framework. Why? Because here, what we have done, we manually connect control layer with the service layer with the DAO layer. But this is not the correct approach in Spring Framework. In Spring Framework, we should implement the concept of dependency injection. Means I want container to automatically inject DAO layer to service layer and service layer to controller layer. That means this auto adding features I want to implement in case of Spring MVC. In this example, there is no auto adding, right? This is your controller. What you have done? Manually, you have creating an object of the class. Then you're calling some method of service class. Then what you have done in the service class? Service class manually you have created an object calling some method of the DAO class. Then what you have done in the DAO class? Manually calling some service methods. Right? So now the thing is that we have not implemented the actual auto varying, okay, or dependency injection that need to be done by the IOC container. That auto varying part we have not implemented. So let's implement that one, auto varying part. So before that, already I told you that Spring support the concept of loose coupling. So how to implement loose coupling? Interface and implementation class. So when it is calling login service .java, here you should provide interface and implementation class. Assume your interface name is login service interface. And for login DAO also, I should go for interface implementation, login DAO, interface.java. Because always we should use interface and implementation class to implement the concept of loose coupling. So from that perspective, I have to create one class here in our this login service. So right click, new interface. Interface name is login service interface. Now in this interface, you can just declare this method called login check. Control C. Right. So my implementation class should implements login service IAPL. Now if you see here, we have implemented interface. Same like that, we want to implement interface for DAO layer. So let's create interface first. Right click, new interface. Name of the interface is login DAO interface. Now inside this login DAO interface, I have to provide the method signatures. One is this. Another is this one. Right. So this is an interface. Implementation class is login DAO. It should implements login DAO. Right. So my class will implement interface. So what is the advantage is that we can implement loose coupling when controller is going to call service layer is going to call the DAO layer. We can implement loose coupling. How it is? Just see here. Controller is calling service layer. So in controller is calling service layer, I want to implement loose coupling. So what I can write? Just you can write login service interface ls equal to this. So in this example, you have implemented loose coupling because the interface reference is going to the class object. Same like that, when you have implemented the service layer, serverless layer is going to call the DAO layer. When we talk about service layer is going to call the DAO layer. Now, if you want your service layer to call DAO layer, so here you can write login service, IMPL, then implementation. Sorry, which is the interface? This is interface. So using interface reference, I want to point out, right? So login service, login DAO, interface. Using interface reference, I'm pointing to class object. So this is how we can implement loose coupling. So now, when you added interface implementation and using interface reference, I'm going to point out, I'm going to call from controller to service layer, I'm going to loose coupling. Similarly, using interface reference, I'm calling from service to DAO layer, I implemented loose coupling. Right. So now, if you see this example, this is also not fully proper example of Spring MVC. One of the reasons is that we have not yet implemented auto adding. If you see in the, right, just give me 1 minute. If you see in this example, whatever we have done, we have not yet implemented auto adding. Auto adding in the sense, you have implemented loose coupling because your login controller is calling service layer and service layer is calling to the DAO layer using interface implementation. So loose coupling is implemented, but auto adding is not implemented. Auto adding means what? I should not create these objects manually. Here, as a developer, I have created an object of service layer. Just see here. As a developer, I have created an object of DAO layer. As a developer, I have created an object of DAO layer manually. I should not do that. I want container to create these objects. That is the concept of auto adding, right? Or @auto add annotation. So if I want to implement auto adding into my Spring MVC application, so how I can implement auto adding for a Spring MVC application? For this, we have been given some of the annotation. How I can implement auto adding for a Spring MVC application? We have been given some of the annotation for this. What are the annotations? For auto adding in a Spring MVC, we have been given some of the annotations. Step number 8. So add all the annotations to implement what where? What are the annotations? Already I've used @controller for calling the controller. Now to call from controller to service, if I want to call, then I have to use @service. From service, if I want to call the DAO layer, I have to use @DAO. Just check when you're using @controller. @controller you're using, right? Same like that. @service, @DAO. Another is @component. Right? So these annotations you have to implement. In that case, I don't have to create the object automatically created and injected by the IOC container. So how to use these annotations? Correct. So how I can use these annotations? Just see here. Component or repository. If you see this code, just see here. Controller, right? Just see. Here I use @AutoAdd reg service. So I am in container will inject the service layer object inside the controller layer. Correct. Next, and here I use @controller. Next, controller is calling service layer. Now here I'm using @service, and I have injected, or IC controller have injected DAO layer object inside this class. So that's I've used @AutoAdd raise DAO. And using that object, I'm calling the next method. Right? So if you want to see another one class here, DAO layer, now here I have used this DAO class as a repository. DAO class you have used @repository. Okay. So let me check. Let me do the same things in our current example. Let me check this auto wiring is working or not for our example. So first one is a controller, login controller. So login controller, here I have to create an object, login controller. Now what I want to do, I want to inject service layer inside the controller layer. So the service layer class name, login service. Interface name, login service ls. So I want IOC controller to inject login service interface instance inside the login controller. So I can use @AutoAdd that we have done in the last example using a small example. Now this is slightly bigger example. So here when I'm using @AutoAdd, using that I've created a particular object, and using this object I'm calling a particular method for the service layer. So if I use ls, to call the service layer, then I don't need this method because this object is created by the container and injected inside the control layer. Fine. Next, from service layer, I'm going to call DAO layer. So in the service layer, I'm going to call the DAO layer. So what I can do here, I can inject service layer, right? So just write here @service. Fine. Now what I want the container to inject the object of DAO layer here. The DAO layer class name is login DAO interface LD. I want IOC container to inject @auto add. That's it. Now in that case, I don't have to create this object manually. IOC container should create that object and inject that object into the service layer. So using that object, I'm calling the method in the service layer. Is there any other object? Any other things you have to create? Yes. Next, we have the DAO layer. Now this DAO layer, I can use it as a repository. And I can just make it a small name as DAO. Like this. That's it. So I think now this time auto wiring should work for this Spring MVC application. Let me check. I think it should work. Everything is done. Select your index, right click. Let me run. Right click, run as another server. Right, running. So when you click login, it is saying some error called login controller injection dependencies failed. Okay, why it is failed? Let me tell you. Here, one thing we have not done. The classes that you have created, right? These classes you should map in the file called Spring dispatcher.servlet here. You have just mapped only controller. Context context component scan back base package com.controller. So that is working for only controller. So what you have to do is that you have to map all the classes that you are using here. You have to map all the classes that you are using here. So you can do for DAO and service and bin. Control C, Control V. So here base package equal to we can use com.dow. Similarly, you can write here this package equal to com.bean, com.service. Similarly, this package equal to com.service. So this is the package that you are using in your project. That those package name you should mention. Then only it can identify which project, which package you are using and how. Right? Okay. Now let me check. It should work this time. Let me check it's running or not. It should run. It may find slight bigger application, but yes, this is how Spring MVC work. But we are using only only one use case, right? That is login. So when you click login, if you see here, I got user ID password. Use the user ID as for in the database. 1 2 3 4 and welcome. 1 2 3 4 and welcome. Correct username password. So I got login success. Is something wrong? Then I got login failure. So how it is working? In this example, if you see, if you go to the controller, IOC container have injected the instance of login service interface inside the controller. That's why I'm going to use that instance to call the next service. IOC container have created the object and injected it inside the controller. Same like that, if I'm going with the service layer. Service layer, if you go to service layer, you can see here IOC container have created an object of the DAO layer and injected it inside the service layer, not me. Then if you go to the DAO layer, in the DAO layer you'll find that it's set to be as an at the repository, and rest of the logic you can see how it is. Right? So this is a very good example, a very good application using Spring MVC.